natin si Enzo. Balang araw, papalitan natin yun ng tunay, ha?
Opo.
3 line of 9, pero para makapasok ka sa university, kailangan wala kang line of 8.
Yes, Dad.
Buti na lang, pinractice natin yung defense mo. O, tingnan mo, panalo. Oh, nandiyan ka na pala.
Hi, Dad.
Nakapag-review ka na ba?
Opo, Dad.
O baka naman mamaya lumabas ka pa. Mag-review ka uli. Tandaan mo, ako, kuya mo, titulito mo, lahat doon nagtapos. Tignan mo kami ngayon. Lahat maayos ang buhay, di ba?
Nauna na daw si Enzo sa Jollibee. Mukhang may isi-celebrate tayo ah.
Dad, sorry. Hindi yun nakapasa.
Enzo, naging mabuti kang anak. Yan ang mas mahalaga. Walang araw na hindi ako naging proud sa'yo.
Let me introduce myself. So I'm Dr. Nestor Castro. I'm a professor of anthropology at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. So I won't go into these details of defining who Indigenous peoples are because as far as I've heard, it was already discussed during the previous sessions. So I'll skip this. I'll skip the IPRA definition as well. And let me go to different indigenous communities in Luzon. So this will be an exploration of these different groups. Let me start with Negrito communities in Luzon. So the term Negrito comes from the Spanish word Negrito, negro meaning black, Negrito, small black populations. The Negritos are the Aboriginal peoples of the Philippines. They are believed to have come to the Philippines from mainland Asia approximately 30,000 years ago. That's why we could also find Negritos in the Malay Peninsula, in southern Thailand, in the Andaman Islands, in coastal New Guinea. In the Philippines, they're found all over the archipelago. But since I will focus on Luzon, so these are the different Negrito groups in Luzon. They are called by many names, so I'm using endonyms. That means what they call themselves. So some are call themselves as the Agta. Later I'll show a map. The Alta, the Arta, the Atta, the Aita. You will notice that they are cognates. In linguistics, we call them cognates. Magkakasing tunog and probably merong common origin ang term. Sa mga agta of Northern Sierra Madre, where I did some of my studies, basta pag tinanong mo what does agta mean, ang sinasabi nila, kami ang mga agta. Sa Agta world kasi, may dalawang klase ng human beings. Yung Agta, sila yon, at yung Tolay. Ang Tolay can be Tagalog, Ilocano, it can be Americano, it can be Chinese. Yun ay Tola. Parang Agta and others. Ang translation sa Tagalog ng Tolay ay tao. Kaya pag kumatok ka sa kanilang bahay, meron bang tao rito? Ang sagot nila, walang tao rito, agta lang. Ano? So parang yan ang kanilang dichotomy of human beings in the world, agta and non-agta. I'm not sure whether among the Aita, whether at the Atta, the Arta, the same is true. Okay. Then we have the Batak also in Palawan, the Dumagat, which is an exonym, katawagan ng mga Tagalog sa kanila kasi matatagpuan sila sa tabing dagat sa Rizal at sa Aurora provinces. May isang grupo, technically hindi natin sila masasabing Negrito, sila ay mga remontado kasi ang mga remontado, mga Tagalog din. Pero noong panahon ng pananakop ng mga Kastila, umatras sila sa kabundukan, montanya, sa Spanish ang bundok, para umiwas sa Spanish taxation. So sa bundok ito ng Rizal at nakipag-asawahan sa mga Dumagat. So product sila ng mixed marriage between Tagalogs and Dumagats. They speak an indigenous language of Tagalog known as Sinauna. Ito yung lumang-lumang klase ng Tagalog. So some of the pictures that you see here, the topmost picture are Umiray Dumagat in Aurora province. And the middle and bottom of photos are Agta of Sierra Madre, particularly in coastal Isabela, such as Palanan and Bacunacon. Sa lowermost picture, this is a traditional Agta house, which in anthropology, we call the lean-to. Naka-lean kasi siya, depende sa orientation ng sunlight, nagro-rotate yung bahay. Kapag tag-ulan, magre-retreat sila sa ilalim ng mga puno. Kung tag-araw, naandyan sila sa buhanginan. Yun ang tawag nila talaga. No? Tapos, at the average, once every 3 weeks, lumilipat-lipat sila ng domicile. So yung mga agta of Sierra Madre, particularly Isabela, up to now, they are still nomadic hunters and gatherers. The few remaining hunters and gatherers in the world, together with the Kalahari Kung San, together with the Inuit. So when we did the census, this was way back in the early 1990s, there are only 1,700 plus Agta individuals in that area. So ito yung distribution nila. So ang tinuturo ko lang ay sa Luzon, hindi ko na pinakialaman ang Visayas at Mindanao. So ano ba ang culture ng mga Negrito? So ginagamit yung Spanish term kasi pag tinawag ko silang Ita, sasabihin ng mga Agta, hindi naman kami Ita, kami Agta. Sabihin ng Aita, ay maling katawagan yung Ita, kami ay Aita. Okay? So traditionally, they are engaged in hunting and gathering. The Agta of northern Sierra Madre are still nomadic, while the rest are already semi-nomadic or semi-sedentary. Now, they have lost all of their original languages and now speak the languages borrowed from neighboring populations. So lahat ng Negrito populations in the country speak an Austronesian language, which is not the original Negrito language. In South and Southeast Asia, yung mga Andamanese lang ang nakapag-maintain ng kanilang original language. Bakit? Kasi ang unang paraan ng mga Negritos in the Philippines para umangkop sa dominant society ay hiramin ang wika ng kanilang neighboring populations. Okay, medyo mabilis to kasi maraming grupo akong itatackle. No? North of Luzon Island, ang mga ethnic groups dito or the indigenous peoples belong to, technically speaking, they're called Ibanagic groups. They are the Itbayaten of Itbayat Island, the Ivatan of Batanes, mainland Batanes, particularly Batan Island, of and the Ibatan of the Babuyan Islands. So magkakaibang indigenous people ito, but their languages are similar in terms of lineage. Okay? Merong isang related IT group in Taiwan, more particularly in Lanyu Island, also called Orchid Island of Taiwan. These are the Yami. So, ang kwento ng mga Yami, we were based in the Philippines prior to the coming of the Spanish, but when the Spanish colonized Batanes, we were pushed back into Taiwan. So, kaya't mayroong tradition ng mga Yami na bumalik pa rin sa Batanes every now and then. Kaya lang, mas preserved ang Yami culture kesa sa culture ng Ivatan. So yung larawan na makikita natin, very, very common, yung sinasabing Tina Turner na raincoats. This is the traditional rainwear of Ivatan women. Because we know that Batanes is within the typhoon belt, and so the Ivatans and different Ivanagic groups have developed a cultural adaptation to typhoons. Anong klase ng adaptation ito? First, they practice land fragmentation, as you can see in the picture. So, merong iba't ibang tinatanim silang mga crops, at pag na-damage ang isang klase ng crop, nagsusurvive ang ibang klase ng crop. Therefore, angkop na angkop sa isang lugar na kadalasang binabagyo. There is a preference for cultivating root crops such as yam, taro, and sweet potato. Prior to the introduction of rice in Batanes, the traditional staple food of the Ivatan is the uvi. Ito yung purple yam. Dahil siya ay root crop, hindi siya nadadamage ng typhoons. Ang rice introduced from mainland Luzon. In between the different farm lots, nagtatanim sila ng butalaw trees. Ito ay parang windbreakers for the typhoon. And of course, the Ivatan house, right now, na ang kilala nating traditional Ivatan house, are made of stone and with thick cogon roofs, which is suitable for a typhoon belt. However, prior to the coming of the Spanish, it was not made of stone but made of logs. Pag-angkop na rin sa bahay na bato ng mga Kastila yung pagkakaroon ng bahay na bato. Sa Orchid Island, log houses pa rin. So ang mga Ivatan, they recognize different terms for different types of typhoons. Hindi ko na i-explain ano yung iba't ibang terms na ito, pero dahil iba-iba para sa kanila ang iba't ibang klase ng bagyo, therefore iba't iba ang pamamaraan nila of how to deal with these typhoons. Ito ang tinatawag natin na indigenous knowledge. Dahil sila ang mas nakakaalam sa kanilang kapaligiran, sila ang merong isang klase ng siyensya na na-develop para maka-respond sa ganitong klase ng kalagayan. Later na lang sa open forum, I could dwell more on this. Meron din silang indigenous omens para malaman kung may darating na typhoon tulad ng pag umaalon ng perpendicular yung waves, pag biglang nag-change yung color ng horizon, pag maulap ang Mount Iraya, pag humahaba ang leaves ng mga puno ng saging, pag lumalabas sa mga bahay ng langgam ang mga langgam, sabi nila may paparating ng typhoon. Para sa atin na outsider, sabihin natin, ay superstitions lang yan. Pero para sa kanilang mga Ivatan, ito ay mga omens and therefore maghahanda na sila sa coming typhoon. Okay, let me shift to another group. the peoples of the Cordillera. And actually, this is where I did both my master's thesis and my PhD dissertation. I stayed in the Cordillera region from for 3 years. Hindi ko nabanggitin yung tanong. Yung mga taon. For 3 years, I did my research in this area, particularly in Ifugao and in Kalinga. So the Cordillera peoples are the indigenous people of the Cordillera Administrative Region. They inhabit the biggest mountain range in the country. This is the Gran Cordillera Central. And the Philippine Constitution guarantees the establishment of an autonomous region for the Cordillera. But up to now, there is no autonomous region, only an administrative region. So ito yung mga provinces ng Cordillera. Cordillera is a landlocked region. Ang capital niya ay Baguio. Pero maraming iba't ibang indigenous people na bumubuo sa tinatawag nating Cordillera peoples. In the past, outsiders called them Igorots or Igorotes. Pero marami sa mga Cordillera peoples don't want to be called Igorot. Some of them acceptable yung term na Igorot, such as those found in Benguet and Mountain Province. But for the rest, they would prefer to be called by their local names. So they are the Bontoc, the Ibaloy, the Ifugao, Isnag or Apayao, Itneg or Tingyan, the Iwak, the Kalanguya or Kalahan, the Kalinga, and the Kankanae. Okay? So makikita nyo doon ang rice terraces in Batad, in Banawe. Typical Ifugao houses in Mayawyao. Again, lower picture, Ifugaos at the viewpoint in Banawe, the famous Banawe rice terraces. Yung upper picture is a Kalinga man from the village where I did my study. This is in the village of Dananao, and you will see he sports tattoos on his chest, demonstrating that in the past he was a warrior. So what is the culture of the Cordillera? The Cordillera consists of autonomous villages called ili. Autonomous siya kasi each ili will have its own political jurisdiction. Walang federation of villages. The elders sit as the village leaders. They form a council of elders, all of them men. And traditionally, there was endemic warfare in the area because of the practice of head-taking. During the American colonial period, medyo napigilan na ito. At sa ngayon, every now and then, particularly in Kalinga, nagkakaroon pa rin ng warfare, pero wala ng head-taking. Pero syempre, aside from warfare, meron ding peacemaking, which is called as the Bodong. Some call them Vochong, Vachen, Kalon. These are alternative terms. And this is a peace pact between two villages. Now, ang concept of land ownership, particularly among the Kalinga, where I did my study, is very complex, kasi iba't ibang klase ng ownership depende sa anong klase ng land. Rice terraces are family owned. Swidden fields or yung kaingin are owned through use of right. Ibig sabihin, habang binubungkal mo, sa'yo yan. Pag hindi mo na binubungkal, hindi sa'yo yan. Woodlands are owned by the extended kin group, grupong mag-anak. Forests are owned communally. Burial grounds are owned by the spirits. Humans don't own it. And residential areas are privately owned. So makikita natin may kaibahan ito sa system of ownership na recognized by the state. Kasi more specific and intricate ang ownership among the Kalinga. Actually, at the end of my presentation, I'll present certain conflicts that arose because of these conflicts of land ownership. Sa bordering region, which is Cagayan Valley, ang mga indigenous people dyan, very diverse din. The Bugkalot, previously known as Ilongot, ito yung litrato niya na nakatayo. The Gaddang, ito yung pamilyang Gaddang, husband, wife, and child. Mga Ibanag, mga Isinay, Itawis, Malaweg, and Yogad. Marami rito ay acculturated groups na rin. Hindi ko pwedeng, pwede naman pero hindi ninyo marirecognize pag larawan ng Ibanag, katulad din natin ang kanilang pananamit. Meron ding mga Ibanag na asendero, meron ding mga yogad na businessman, So pag sinasabi nating indigenous peoples in Luzon, hindi lahat sila mahirap. May mayaman, may mahirap, nagkakaiba lang ng kultura. Sa Mindoro naman, ito ang iba't ibang grupo ng mga mangyan. Mangyan is a generic term which just means tao. Nung tinatanong ng mga anthropologists nung turn of the century, ano bang tawag ninyo sa sarili ninyo? Ang sabi nila, kami mga mangyan. Ibig sabihin, mga tao kami. Pero alam ng anthropologists na maraming klase ng mangyan, sabihin ng iba, kami ay iraya mangyan. Ibig sabihin, nakatira upstream. Sabihin ng mga iba, kami mga buhid. O sa Bisaya, bukid. Nakatira sa bundok. Yung iba, sabi nila, totoong tao kami. O Hanunoo mangyan. So itong distribution nila nasa hinterlands ng Mindoro Island. But upon the coming of the Spanish, actually they were located at the coastal areas. But they were pushed into the hinterlands as the Spanish and Tagalogs and Visayans appropriated coastal areas. So ito ang ilang larawan ng traditional practices of the Mangyan. Merong teeth blackening as a form of beautification. Makikita niyo yung traditional wear ng mga Hanunoo Mangyan using a blue indigo dye. Yung kanilang longhouse, makikita ninyo. At saka ang mga Mangyan, more particularly the Hanunoo Mangyan, meron silang na-maintain na syllabic writing na tinatawag nilang Surat Mangyan. Up to now, they still use this. So what was their traditional mode of livelihood? So primarily, nagkakaingin sila, supplemented by hunting and gathering. They are semi-nomadic and they have a very strong attachment to their physical environment. Sa isang pag-aaral ni Harold Conklin, isang anthropologist from Yale University, nakita niya ang mga Hanunoo Mangyan merong very long fallow period. Magtatanim sila sa isang lupain, pag inabandon ito about 20 years bago balikan kasi inaalaw nila na ma-replenish ang nutrients ng soil. Sa Mangyan learning systems, they have strong oral traditions. Tapos binanggit ko na yung kanilang Surat Mangyan. At meron silang form of poetry known as the Ambahan na isang paraan nila para i-express ang kanilang pag-ibig sa kanilang mga minamahal. It is learning by doing. They have indigenous knowledge systems and practices documented by anthropologists related to agriculture, ethnobotany, astronomy, etc. Yung indigenous people of Palawan, more or less, pareho rin sa kultura ng Mindoro, Mangyans. Pero iba ang katawagan sa mga IP groups in the area. They are the Katney, the Palakwan, the Tagbanwa, and the Taot Bato. Okay. So, yung Palakwan at Tagbanwa, meron din silang form of writing called Ibalnan, which they have maintained up to now. Yung picture sa lower left, ito ay Taot Bato because they live in caves. Picture at the bottom ay isang ritual among the Palakwan where my students and I did our field school in several years ago because we have an annual field school and this was one of the areas where we did our study. Okay. Yun, inintroduce ko yung iba't ibang indigenous peoples of the Cordillera and Cagayan Valley, Batanes and Babuyan, Mindoro and Palawan. Tapos yung mga Negrito groups na nakaspread out all the way from Cagayan up to Sorsogon. Ano? So, isa sa mga pinakakilalang IP coming from Luzon, more particularly, he is a Kalinga, is Makliing Dulag. Okay. Si Makliing Dulag ay isang pangat or chieftain among the Butbut tribe of Kalinga. Kasi among the Kalingas, they have many tribes. Yung Butbut tribe is a tribe found in 3 villages. Makliin comes from the village of Bugnay. Hindi ko alam sa mga generation na ng mga millennials at zillennials kung kilala nila si Makliing Dulag, pero he became famous in the late 1970s up to the early 1980s because during the term of President Ferdinand Marcos, there was an attempt to establish a series of 4 hydroelectric dams along the Chico River, which will displace 100,000 Kalinga and Bontoc. So ito yung famous lines ni Makliing dahil he was the leader of the Kalinga that opposed the Chico Dam. 3 slides to kasi mahaba yung quotation. And it's translated into English. Ano? Sabi ni Makliing Dulag, if the waters of the Kayakayam, their term for Chico, as well as the Pasil River, are dammed, that means a dam is built there, who will live in these dammed waters? Crocodiles. Who will crocodiles eat? People. I say to you, the question of dams is not a political one. The question is life, our Kalinga life. And what is the most precious thing to a man? Life. If life is threatened, what ought man to do? And this he must do, otherwise he is dishonored. That will be worse death than. If we do not fight and the dams push through, we die anyway. If we fight, we die honorably. I exhort all of you then, kayaw, or struggle, or fight. And because we fight now, our children may win and keep this Kalinga land, and the land shall become ever more sacred then, nourished by our sweat and blood. Then we who sacrifice that they may live and be secure and happy shall abide with them and nurture the generations, guarding the fields, the papayaw or the rice terraces, the ili or the villages, blessing their lives till endless time. So this was a speech that he gave in February 1975. Unfortunately, much later, I think this was in 1984, Makliing Dulag was assassinated by the Philippine Constabulary. So right now, he is considered a hero in Kalingaland as well as in the entire Cordillera because now it was April 24 when he was martyred. Annually, we celebrate Cordillera Day every April 24th. And when Cory Aquino assumed office after the February 1986 revolution, one of her first pronouncements is to do away with the Chico Dam. Ngayon, unfortunately, bagamat hindi na tuloy ang Chico Dam, meron pang ibang mga dam projects ang Duterte administration, such as the Kaliwa Dam, which will displace Dumagats. So, what are the problems faced by indigenous peoples right now? Since I have limited time, the first is displacement from their ancestral domains. Maraming reasons, sometimes because of ethnic migration by non-IPs into their area. Also because there are claimants who would say, ay, wala naman kayong ownership sa land na yan, you don't have titles, o may government project dyan. Another problem is the loss of indigenous languages. Actually, just last night, I spoke in another webinar about endangered languages in the Philippines, and Negrito languages are the most endangered among the languages in the Philippines. There is the presence of planned large-scale mining projects. So yung pictures sa right are Dumagats and Remontados opposing the Kaliwa Dam, which is a dam project of the Chinese government, but supported by Duterte, to be located in from Aurora province all the way to Rizal province. Some of the areas that will be submerged by the dam are sacred grounds of the indigenous people. There are also large-scale mining projects all over the country. In my original PowerPoint presentation, I had a map, but when I revised it, I removed the map. But they're found all over. Some are operational, such as the OceanaGold, which is located in Quirino and Nueva Vizcaya provinces, and they affect the Bugkalots in the area, as well as migrant Ifugaos who have lived in the area. The license of OceanaGold has already expired, and people are protesting the presence of OceanaGold. But again, the Duterte government has allowed it to continue operating despite the absence of a permit. Hydropower projects such as the Kaliwa Dam, and usually indigenous people are victims of crossfire between the Philippine military and rebel groups. So pinagbibintangan silang rebels ng military. Minsan pinagbibintangan din silang mga government agents ng mga NPA. So naandun sila sa precarious situation. So ganito ang kalagayan ng mga indigenous people of Luzon. Although I haven't heard the presentations of Ms. Samira Gutok and Mr. Chad Book, I'm sure malaki ang similarity sa conditions with the indigenous people of Mindanao. So I will end with that.